So a good few years ago, I went and made a load of lightsabers using 3D printing and resin casting. In this video, I'm going to go through and explain the different design iterations I went through, from cutting PVC pipes to making multiple metallic cold casted lightsabers. Now, one of the main reasons I tried to do this was due to some of the absolute scum of the earth, people with less empathy than hellspawn's torturers themselves, dropshippers. Top of the list for signs you're gonna have a bad day is 1. Stubbing your toe, 2. Trusting a fart is only gonna be a fart, and 3. Getting scammed, also known as paying your taxes. And today was one of them. I didn't just fall for, I face planted into one of those Facebook advert scams. They show these images and videos of these lightsabers that I didn't realize at the time cost thousands of dollars, but they were like selling them for like $50, and I thought, great deal. I always wanted one of those, and normally I knew you could buy them for around $100 each. The ones they put on their own website cost like hundreds and thousands to make. Pretty sure this is the shop and the images that they stole to use for their own website. The original is FX Sabers, and they stole it, and then they put on these just awesome lightsaber fights, which I didn't realize they had also stolen, and it got me hooked. And then what I received 3.5 months later, I don't have it anymore because I threw it out of absolute anger, was a $1 piece of trashy plastic from China that perhaps a toddler might have enjoyed for 17 seconds until it broke from doing the one thing it was supposed to do, lightsaber fights. So then, seeing how easily I fell for this scam, I thought, what if I made my own awesome lightsabers that weren't a scam and then sold them on the Amazon for stay-at-home moms, Etsy. And thus began my journey. I saw someone on Etsy making them out of the PVC pipes, and I thought to myself, I could do that, since they were selling them for a healthy chunk of change. And so this was my first attempt, and it wasn't great. We scrapped that pretty soon because it was really hard to cut these ring yokes perfectly, and getting everything to fit together was just not happening. So next, I stepped into the world of 3D printing. And this was a nightmare all in itself for me. I made a video about this on my channel called 3D Printer from Hell. You can go check out that for the details why it was so torturous. But after a couple months of troubleshooting just to get the 3D printer to print about 50% success rate, as in half the time the prints would still fail, it was so frustrating, but I just had to make do. I started printing designs for my next version that I had made in Tinkercad. This was my first step into 3D modeling, and it came out alright, but not great. You can see the different parts I was making, and some of it was still using the PVC part. I thought that would save on the 3D printing time, but I think the reason I moved on from this, even though it kind of looks alright, is and works, was it was really hard to get the batteries to fit down here. They basically wouldn't fit. So this design wasn't gonna work. I needed to try something different. Now, here I was finding the limits of Tinkercad, so I turned to the mighty Fusion 360 and spent an ungodly amount of hours learning and designing this next version. And it's pretty cool, if I do say so myself. I was taking inspiration from some of the Veda comic books for this design, and it probably spent about 6 weeks or something designing and redesigning over and over just to get something good. I had sketches in a notebook too for the inspiration, but I've lost that now. Can I find it anymore? It is lost. I did really like it. It's very cool, very shiny when it came out. I had to 3D print it in parts and then super glue it together. And next came the self-induced torture step, which anyone who has ever done anything similar to this with 3D printing will know about. I had to spend a literal eternity sanding and filling to make it smooth, getting rid of all of those layer lines. Though after a while you just kind of get in the zone, stick on some tunes and just enjoy the therapeutic nature of it. Torture turned into therapy, I guess. Next came another thing I had to learn, which was molding and casting. I used these things from Smooth On. They're pretty good, actually, how they worked. So you make the molds from the silicone here, and there's like 2 parts. You mix it together, combine, pour it around your shape, and then you pour it in resin to cast it. And fortunately, there was actually quite a lot of videos on YouTube about doing this stuff from other prop makers out there, and I think Tested had a really good video specifically with lightsabers. So I just used those video tutorials and did what it says on the back of these packets to make them. And this was the mold that I ended up with afterwards. This lightsaber went in here, and the 3D prints really needed to be so smooth. It was kind of like a mirror reflecting the light at you for the cold casting process, which is where you take this aluminium powder and you dust it into the mold itself. But you'd also pour some of it into the resin before casting, and this will then allow you to get a shiny metallic look on your lightsaber. It's pretty cool. I had to learn all about doing that, and I also had to use these inner mold parts that would go in here like this, and that would be to give room for the batteries to slot in and the electronics. And getting this inner mold to work was really a lot of trial and error, and maybe one of the most difficult parts of getting this functioning was that a lot of problem solving just went around figuring this out. And I'd have to do a thing called rotary casting, where you just spin it around and do a first layer to make sure you get all the cracks and crevices and fill in all the details that are going to be important to getting the lightsaber to come out perfectly or close to perfectly. And then out of the molds would pop out one of these bad boys, which was pretty cool. You know, and then I had to find the right balance of the aluminium powder and the lining for the resin, and that took a few tries, as you can see here. And then you had to spend a huge amount of elbow grease buffing and polishing up the metallic parts to make them super shiny. And after that, at last, I could get to the painting parts of it here. I used this nice shiny metallic paints on these detailed bits, copper and gold paint. And then you could just shove the electronics in there and you would have a glowy stick. Yay! So the electronics was pretty simple really in the end. I was using a 9-volt battery, some resistors, and this super bright LED, which was basically like staring into the sun. It'll get super duper hot though, so you'd have to put it on this special surface mount plate thingy here. And you have to use solder paste to get their things in there and then heat it up from underneath. I just used a lighter and would heat it up, and that would do the trick. I'm not sure if that was the best way of doing it, but it did the job. And then I'd attach on this lens here, which would then focus the light, so it would go down the beam and not just spread out, straight down the beam, the blade. And you'd need to also stick a super large heatsink, otherwise you just melt your face off. It was so warm. They get so hot, these LEDs. I think I just used some large bolts. Blades here are made from these long polycarbonate tubes. I got a bunch of these still sitting in my attic. And the light would go down and then it would reflect here off these end caps, which would screw on. And there's a mirror here to shine the light back down at you. And the blade is like diffused, frosted kind of blade. I did get some clear blades too, but they didn't look as good because the diffusion along the light helps it kind of just look way better. And I also use these blades as kind of some cool LED lights desk decorations for a while. You can see here in this picture. So I love this design, super cool looking, but it had some issues. These lightsabers are all original designs because, you know, the whole copyright thing, I didn't want to cross over that line. But I found that this design took hours and hours to paint and finish and make shiny and polish. And it was more difficult because of all the intricate details and all the curves as well. Painting this curve here and along here was quite time consuming. And awesome for a single blade product, but a one-off kind of prop. But for trying to make a load of them, it was going to be a lot of effort. Particularly because I wanted to sell them at a That was the whole point of resin, of casting in resin. It'll be easier and quicker to manufacture them, so I could sell them at a good price point while still looking really cool. And then also, when I went to test out its strength against a tree, well, this happened on the very first hit. Snap. In half. Which would be great if anybody ever wanted to duel with it. Looks really cool, but not so functional. Look how shiny this is. I spent a lot of time shining that one. Ooh, it's like a mirror. So back to the drawing board I went. Here was the final design I came with. And this was so much quicker this time. I think I batched it out in like a day or two. Notice no curves. Trying to simplify it. And then I paid it to get 3D printed from someone online because I didn't want to have to deal with the absolute migraine-inducing machine of my own stupid 3D printer ever again. As you can see, it turned out great, but now I had the same process of eternally sanding and priming and filling to make it smooth. Less torturous this time, knowing what was expected, but just embracing the zone of the non-stop sanding for days. Apart from certain parts here where I wanted this cool texture effect. I don't know if you can see it on camera, but it's actually kind of like almost, it's not just matte, but like it has a bumpy, like grippy texture. I actually forget how I created that now. Obviously I still had to smooth away the layer lines, but I must have somehow applied a dusting to this part of the print to give it that texture. Some mysteries are lost to time, and it could have just well have been a happy accident that arose throughout the process and I kept it because I thought it looked cool. I honestly do not remember how I did it. Then same again for this now super smooth 3D print. I had to make a silicone mold for it, followed by some more cold casting. And with this one, I also added brass powder to the resin cause it weighs more than a point of rocks, giving that lightsaber some serious heft to it. You know, this version of the lightsaber, super light, broke with one swing on a tree. But you could knock out a hippo with this beefy boy here. Now, I didn't add the brass powder into any of the surface. It was just on the internal parts of the resin, simply just to make it heavier. So you can see this had way less places to paint, and notice no curved lines to paint. Simples. And the control box here is actually 3D printed. That's glued in now, but it was not in place inside of the mold. As I found out with the previous version, often it may come out missing parts of the corner or something like this, and that would be no good for a final product. So yeah, this was then ended up being pretty cool. I was very happy with it in the end. The only issue being this jagged line from where the mold didn't connect correctly. You would have had to fix that in the future. You can see there, lights up for you. Don't stare at the light. Super bright. And we can put the blade in here. Awesome. But yeah, with this model finished, I then took a bucket load of photos and started an Etsy shop where I proceeded to sell a total of 0 lightsabers. 6 months of work. I spent like €2,000 more than that, and it came out to nothing. And I was ready to give up too. I knew this was way too much effort to be a worthwhile business for me. Especially just making these in my bedroom. If I had an actual workshop, maybe a lathe or two, but still manufacturing this at home or anything at home is just hard. It is too hard to make it worth it. And there are so many cool shops out there making super awesome lightsabers already. But I did get to learn a load of awesome skills from it. 3D printing and designing and modeling and then molding and casting in the resin and prop making. And making a one-off prop is really, really fun actually. I would definitely do more just making one-offs. Super fun. That's a really cool hobby and way easier and way less complicated if you only have to problem solve to make one model rather than many versions of it. So I think that makes it worthwhile because I would have never ever pushed through all that effort to make something awesome and learned so much if I hadn't planned to sell them. I would have just stopped at the start when I realized how hard this was actually gonna be.